This is 100 Years of Cox. You are listening to a podcast by Frances Thompson. I'm telling the story of 10 siblings from the Machel Cox family through the letters they wrote to each other. They were born in England between 1868 and 1884. 7 of them lived in England and 3 lived abroad in the colonies. These siblings are my family. Sibling number 2, Edmund, is my great-grandfather. The 10 siblings started writing a circular letter to each other called the Family Budget in 1906. They continued for the rest of their lives, and then their children continued the stream of letters. The last poignant letter was written in 1987 by David, Arthur's son. I'm recording this podcast in a different location today. I'm in the little town of 1770, 5 hours north of Brisbane. If you don't know any Australian history, 1770 was named for Captain James Cook, who sailed here in his ship Endeavour and landed here in June 1770. Although the locals have always called the town Round Hill, which is also the name given to this narrow headland by Captain Cook. I can picture the scene. They dropped anchor in the bay, and Captain Cook, in his great wisdom, said, "I say, I spy a round hill." We had a dramatic tropical storm yesterday with thunder, lightning, and loads of rain. I'm recording this looking out of the window with a glorious view of the sea and the sandbanks below. Bernard, age 29, child number 6, the London stockbroker. He came up with the idea for a Christmas budget in November 1907, whilst he was trying to write a happy birthday letter to Arthur. He then wrote letters to his 6 UK siblings asking for contributions for a special Christmas edition. He asked his parents, Reverend Dr. John Charles Cox and Marion Cox, to write contributions as well. The parents were not normally allowed to read the budget, but the Christmas edition was a special exception. The Christmas budget was designed as family entertainment and intended to be read aloud in the drawing room on Christmas Day afternoon after tea and presents. There was no television yet, let alone movies or social media. There wasn't even any sort of entertainment on the radio until the 1920s. This was an Edwardian middle-class family who created their own amusements. I hope you're sitting comfortably. Imagine you are in a comfortable but formal drawing room. You've just eaten a big lunch of turkey and plum pudding, and the maid has cleared it away and done the washing up. If you are male, you are wearing a stiff starched collar and tie, a waistcoat and a suit with polished leather shoes. Women will be wearing their best dress, with a high neckline which would reach almost to the chin, and full-length sleeves which went all the way down to the wrist. Fortunately, corsets are now no longer in fashion, but the dress would be tight and fitted. The first item in the Christmas budget is the editorial by Bernard, who is sibling number 6, who was also the editor. Editorial. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon of November the 10th, the editor was writing a birthday letter to his brother at Devonport. Having filled the first page with the usual congratulations, he found himself at a loss how to proceed. He knew that Mrs. Marion Cox, with her usual industry, had supplied the family with all the news. The budget, in its customary round, had exhausted all his epistolary energy. Toying idly with his pen, in the most approved fashion, he was gazing in despair at the blank page before him when an idea came to him. Why not have a Christmas number of the budget? Letters were at once dispatched to the family, and in 2 days' time the first contribution arrived. 4 weeks later, the last one was received, and a voluminous parcel was sent off to the printer. The editor takes this opportunity to express his gratitude to the versatile lady who afforded him her valuable assistance as art editor, and to Messrs. Bemrose and Sons, who are responsible for the excellent reproduction, at a very moderate cost, of Studland Cottages, the charming illustration which was specially drawn for the Christmas budget by the art editor. N.B. Bernard is talking about Vera, who is the sub-editor and drew some art for the Christmas budget. The editor considers he has been very fortunate in securing a contribution from the most charming and gifted of letter writers, also an article and a ballad from the pen of a well-known antiquary, who with the greatest readiness courteously responded to the editor's invitation. N.B. Bernard is talking about Mother, who is the gifted letter writer, and Father, who is the well-known antiquary. A Liverpool lady, who has only recently risen from a bed of sickness, has sent in a collection of curious advertisements, in addition to the particulars of a novel competition for which she is generously giving a prize. N.B. Bernard is talking about Edmund, the eldest sibling who has recently been ill. The editor was delighted to receive many and various contributions from 2 hard-working schoolmasters and an energetic curate. N.B. Bernard is talking about his brothers, Cuthbert and Arthur, who are the schoolmasters, as well as Edmund, who is the curate. For the delightful pen and ink drawings entitled Christmas at Sydenham, the editor is indebted to a lady who willingly spared the necessary time from her multifarious household duties. N.B. Bernard is talking about his sister Avis, who is Arthur's housekeeper at Garfield House School in Plymouth. It is curious to notice that no fiction was sent in, and that no fewer than 3 contributors found writing for the budget Christmas number was as easy as ABC. Everyone will regret that time did not allow of contributions from the colonial members of the budget. There are no reviews of books in the literary supplement, as these so frequently appear in the ordinary budget. Editorial written by the editor, Bernard Machell Cox. The next item in the budget is written by Marion Cox, the mother of the 10 siblings. She wrote a letter every single week to those of her children who did not live at home, and she did this for many decades. Bernard describes his mother as the most charming and gifted of letter writers. I have already read this letter in episode 7 of the podcast, but I decided to include it again here, where the siblings first heard it, as I think it is such a lovely letter. The Lost Art of Letter Writing. Marion Cox, December 1907. My dear family, I have been asked to contribute to the Christmas budget, but having no idea what subject to select, I have followed Bernard's suggestion to write a letter on the lost art of letter writing. That it is a lost art, I think, cannot be disputed by those who have read any of the published letters of bygone generations, or who happened to possess any family letters written by their ancestors, even 80 or 100 years ago. And I think that the reason for this decadence may be traced to 2 principal causes. Firstly, the establishment of the penny postage. Secondly, the want of time, caused by the rush and hurry of the modern age in which we now live. The penny post has, of course, been in many ways a great boon and blessing to mankind. But when we think of the very heavy cost of letters in olden times, which was almost prohibitive to ordinary folk, so that a franc from an MP was a favour most eagerly sought for, we cannot wonder a letter was then a very serious matter, and that much thought and consideration was needed to compress all the information which it was desired to give into the very smallest compass allowable. This also accounts for the very small and yet legible handwriting of those days. For not only was every inch of paper covered, but it was always crossed, and sometimes even recrossed. Contrast this with the reams of paper covered with absolutely illegible writing, sometimes so large that only about a dozen words will go to a page, which is so customary in the present day. This, I think, is perhaps even more due to the second cause, so-called want of time. In former days, most ladies at any rate had few interests and occupations beyond their household duties and exquisite work of all kinds, with perhaps a certain amount of gardening and a little music. Nowadays women have all manner of interests. Many of them go in for some sort of definite career, and outdoor sports, which were formerly confined to the male sex, absorb a large portion of their time and thoughts. They have no time for such a stupid and tiresome occupation as letter writing. But it seems to me that this very largely arises from selfishness. Once one tries to realise how very precious a letter is to those far away, or how much pleasure it gives to the old, or to invalids, then surely we should be more ready to give up some of our time to this pursuit, and even regard it as a duty. And surely the old adage holds good here. If the thing is worth doing at all, it is worth doing well. Personally, I think that the first requisite for a good letter is to call up before your mind's eye the person to whom you are writing. At once you seem to know what things will specially interest them. And just as in conversation you do not tell an event or express your opinions or feelings in the same way to different people, so it should be with a letter. A letter which is meant for everybody never has the same charm as one which is intended expressly for the person to whom it is addressed. Also, I feel convinced that many letters would never give needless and unintentional offence if a little more time and trouble were bestowed upon them. In conversation, we can see at once if what we say is misunderstood or is causing an annoyance, and we can easily set matters right. But a hurriedly written letter often conveys a totally wrong impression, and written words are apt to be remembered long after the careless writer has forgotten all about them. Of course, nobody can deny that the art of letter writing is in some sense a special gift. A sense of humour adds greatly to the pleasure which letters can give. Then again, very reserved people find great difficulty in expressing themselves and shrink from seeing their feelings expressed in black and white. But I feel quite sure that the art can be cultivated just as much as any other gift or accomplishment. And from the point of view of the very great pleasure which can thus be given to others, I think it is an art which is well worthy of cultivation. There are other points which might be considered, such as the loss to future generations of the vivid pictures of home and public life in our own day, which we so enjoy in the annals of our ancestors. But my letter has already run to a great length and tends to become very prosy, so I will conclude with a quotation. A letter timely writ is a rivet to the chain of affection, and a letter untimely delayed is as rust to the solder. If my little lecture tends to promote a cultivation of the art of letter writing in my own family, I shall feel well repaid for my trouble. Your affectionate mother, Marion Cox. The next item was written by Cuthbert, who is sibling number 8. He wrote a poem consisting of 8 verses about the budget and his siblings and how much receiving letters from his siblings means to him. A Song of the Budget by Cuthbert. 1. It costs a lot of labour to indite, a poetical effusion, even slight. But you must not think I grudge it to the budget. 2. My writing may be awful, as you say, illegible or bad some other way, but at least I never smudge it in the budget. 3. If I had to go for letters every day to an office over 50 miles away, how gladly I would trudge it for the budget. 4. If limericks were started now by us, the winning line would not create a fuss. You know we should not fudge it in the budget. 5. If you see a lady screaming in the train, and you wonder if it's laughter or it's pain, your friend you need not nudge, it is the budget. 6. If your servants are despondent, pray be sure there's a remedy I'm certain's bound to cure. The meanest household drudge, it is the budget. 7. What is that restores our mental force when we mayhap have struggled with a course of Browning and his sludge? It is the budget. 8. If for prose and verse the Nobel Prize were looked at with impartial eyes, I'm certain men would judge it to the budget. Poem written by Cuthbert Machel Cox. 2020 explanations from me about Cuthbert's 1907 poem. It took Cuthbert a lot of time to write this poem, but he doesn't grudge it for the budget. His writing may be terrible, but he doesn't smudge it in the budget. If he had to walk 50 miles to collect the budget letters, he would gladly trudge it for the budget. If the siblings all wrote limericks, they would not fudge it in the budget. If you see Vera screaming in the train, your friend you need not nudge, it is the budget. N.B. Bernard added a postscript about verse 5. Vera once created a scene in a London to Brighton and South Coast Railway train and was crying with laughter whilst reading the budget. If your servant is despondent, what will cure the meanest household drudge? It is the budget. What will restore your mental balance after too much Browning and his sludge? It is the budget. N.B. Bernard also adds, "Hear, hear," in verse 7, when Cuthbert writes about Browning and his sludge. And the last verse, if the Nobel Prize was awarded for writing, the prize, of course, would go to the budget. The next item is by Arthur. He is sibling number 3, and he was the owner and headmaster of Garfield House School in Plymouth. I would love to go back in time and sit in the back row of one of Arthur's English lessons. I think he would have been a very interesting teacher. He was a clever wordsmith, and this alphabet poem shows how good he was at phonics. I think the best letters are Y and Z and H. If you are Aussie, you were perhaps taught that the 8th letter of the alphabet is H, but I'm with Arthur on this one, and I think it should be H, spelled A-I-T-C-H. The phonics of this poem don't work unless you say H. A Phonetic Alphabet by Arthur. A is the aid that I'm giving the editor. B is what it feels like to be a competitor. C is the secret of making a rhyme. D is the demon that's wasting my time. E is the ease that the pet foregoes. F's the efficiency nobody knows. G is the genius nobody is. H is a cherished delusion of his. I'm the eyewitness of numbers of things. J is the jaded feeling it brings. K is the case to which I am brought. L is the eloquence painfully sought. M is the emblem of all that I miss. N is the end, or should be, of this. O's where I own I nearly was stuck. P's the peculiar turn of my luck. Q is the cumulation of wit. R's an uncommonly arduous bit. S is the essence of all I have said. T is what teems in the back of my head. U are the youth that I seek to beguile. V are the venial faults of my style. W's dealings are double, you know. X is the only excuse that they know. YZ are the wise educational plums an infant may chew with the barest of gums. Written by Arthur Henry Machell Cox. 2020 explanations from me about Arthur's phonetic alphabet. I think the best line in this poem is the last one, YZ, which Arthur runs together. If you write the words out properly, it would read wise educational plums. But he writes, YZ are the wise educational plums an infant may chew with the barest of gums. Clever, Arthur, very, very clever. My second favourite, closely followed, is the letter H, which if you wrote it out in real words, it says A, cherished. But he writes, H is a cherished delusion of his. It really doesn't work if you say H. The next literary offering was from Reverend Dr. John Charles Cox, who dictated London lunches and town teas to poor Bernard, who scribbled it all down as Dr. Cox poured forth his memories for hours. It is 6 pages of A4, and it's all there for you to listen to in episode 8 of my podcast, so I'm not going to read it all again here. Dr. Cox, my great-great-grandfather, was a grumpy, stubborn and curmudgeonly man. However, he had a phenomenal intellect and a vast knowledge, and I've definitely got a soft spot for him. His memories are of all the places where he enjoyed eating lunch and tea in London from the 1880s to the early 1900s, and contains a great deal of fascinating detail. Bernard wrote in his letter, I asked Father to contribute something to the Christmas budget, and the consequences were alarming. He dictated 20 pages of manuscript, straight off the reel, which took most of yesterday afternoon and evening. Poor Bernard. One day I will hopefully get on a plane again and be able to travel from Australia to England, as I would love to wander London streets, following Dr. Cox's trail of old London dining establishments. The next item is one of my favourites from the Christmas budget. Bernard wrote a limerick about each of the 10 siblings, giving so much detail about their lives and characters, information which is not always evident in the budget letters. I will read each of Bernard's limericks and then I'll give some explanation of what Bernard is talking about. Bernard also puts the limericks in age order. Enid, the eldest, comes first, and Vera, the youngest, is last. Family Limericks by Bernard Machell Cox. Enid. A lady who lived in Lodge Lane had a spouse with a number 1 brain. She was very much moved when the pump really proved to be a success in the main. Enid and Cyril live in Lodge Lane in Liverpool, and her husband Cyril was an expert mathematician. His friend and colleague had been developing a new engineering pump, which required a lot of maths, which Cyril provided. Cyril was fascinated with this project, and he spent hours at a time on it, which the siblings found very entertaining, and the pump went on to be a success and sold well. Next limerick by Bernard is about Edmund. Edmund, a curate who went to Clay Cross, had 3 little hamlets to boss. He set the pace quicker and routed the vicar, who I fear was not much of a loss. Edmund is a Church of England curate, which means he's not yet a vicar or a rector, and he does not yet have his own church. He works at 3 small churches in the vicinity of Clay Cross and Woolly Moor in Derbyshire. There are snippets in other budget letters about Edmund's vicar, who apparently was not very impressive. The next limerick by Bernard is about Arthur. Arthur, a Devonport pedagogue said, "This sleeplessness makes me half dead. A mattress of hair to purchase I'll dare. A saint should rejoice in his bed." Pedagogue is a great word, meaning a formal, strict or pedantic teacher. Arthur was most definitely a pedant. Pedagogue describes him very well. He believed it was very important to be comfortable in bed, and a hair mattress was considered by Arthur to be the best and most comfortable type of mattress. Devonport and Stoke were the areas of Plymouth where Garfield House School was in the early 1900s, but the building is not there anymore. Next limerick by Bernard is about Neville. Neville, a man of the CSAR, returned to the Transvaal afar, where his gold-rimmed pince nez and his curly toupee were thought just a trifle bizarre. Neville lives in South Africa in the Transvaal, and he works as an engineer for the Central South African Railway. Pince nez is spelled Pincenez. It is a French word for the old-fashioned wire-rimmed spectacles that perch on your nose. Hercule Poirot wore them in the Agatha Christie TV programmes. Neville had a large red moustache, which was often described as noble, as well as a lot of curly hair. He didn't have a toupee, he had loads of his own hair. Bernard is just using toupee to rhyme with pince nez. Neville had wild curly hair, a gingery red moustache and spectacles, meaning he was considered a startling sight to the local Africans. The next limerick by Bernard is about Wilfrid. Wilfrid, an Englishman out in the West, in scholastic authority dressed, remarked to his school, "Do you think I'm a fool?" They replied, "If you please, you know best." I don't know much about Wilfrid, although he interests me greatly. He's a bit of a black sheep. I think he had left England by about 1895 or 1896, and was at one point working as a schoolmaster in Canada, but possibly something happened, because by 1906 he is working as a manual labourer, building roads and grubbing tree stumps in British Columbia, living quite a hand-to-mouth existence. Next, Bernard writes a limerick about himself. Bernard. There was a young man of 13, Longton Avenue, Sydenham, I mean, who thought he could edit this budget with credit, but this remains to be seen. Bernard was a well-paid stockbroker. He was generous with his money, and he paid for the Christmas budget to be typed, printed, and bound as a book. He is also quite humble and was never arrogant about his capabilities. He was very kind, and he would definitely have been a favourite uncle. Next limerick by Bernard is about Aldwyn. Aldwyn, the parson who bossed Kota Kota, had a laugh like the toot of a motor when they cried, "You exceed the limit of speed." He merely walked on with some hauteur. Aldwyn is the Church of England missionary who lives in Kota Kota on the western shores of Lake Nyasa in Africa. Nowadays it is Malawi. In 1907, motor cars clearly went toot toot. It is all very gentle and pleasant. Hauteur is spelt Hauteur, another word not used much today. It means proud. The related words haughty and haughtiness are probably more common today than hauteur. Next limerick by Bernard is about Cuthbert, the youngest son and sibling number 8. Cuthbert. A Berkhamsted master once went to public school's camp with a rent in the seat of his what? So he patched up the spot with a piece from the side of a tent. It was clearly not considered polite to write that Cuthbert had a rip in the seat of his trousers. Bernard was oh so polite. Cuthbert was at camp at Aldershot with hundreds of schoolboys in the Rifle Corps pre-World War I. He has ripped his trousers, so he patches them up with a piece of canvas from a tent. Cuthbert, if you did the sewing yourself, I'm actually quite impressed. Next limerick by Bernard is about Avis. Avis, an obstinate damsel of Stoke, kept one of her fingers in soak. When they said, "Take it out," she replied with a pout, "It's really quite short, I shan't choke." Avis really didn't like this limerick, especially rhyming Stoke with soak. Stoke is the suburb next to Devonport in Plymouth. Avis had the habit of keeping her little finger in her mouth. Apparently she did this a great deal, and the whole family teased her about it. Bernard's 10th and last limerick is about the youngest sibling, Vera. Vera. There was a young lady of Kent, whose shoulders were very much bent. When they said, "Oh, my dear," she replied with a sneer, "Oh, rot, I play hockey for Kent." I don't know whether Vera's shoulders really were bent, and maybe people were fearful that her hockey playing would affect her marriage prospects, or whether Bernard just wanted a word to rhyme with Kent. Sydenham is definitely in South London today, but in the early 1900s it was still part of Kent. The family were very proud of Vera's prowess as a hockey player and how fast she could run on the hockey field. Pretty impressive, considering the long skirts they had to wear. Dr. Cox used to brag to his friends about his daughter, the international. In December 1907, Vera is not yet playing for England, but we're getting there. She will soon. I decided to call this episode "There Was a Young Man from Nantucket," not because that particular limerick appears in the budget, but because 1907 was very much the year of the limerick. And the many versions of the Nantucket limerick, many of them really quite rude, are very well known. By 1907, writing limericks had become popular, and many magazines and newspapers advertised competitions for writing limericks, offering large cash prizes. Cuthbert talks about one Berkhamsted schoolmaster who embarrasses himself by winning a limerick competition in 1907 from the English humorous magazine Ali Sloper. And another Berkhamsted master was too embarrassed to use his own name in a limerick competition in a newspaper, used his wife's name instead. The limerick won first prize, and the wife then spent the £13 prize money on jewellery for herself, much to the amusement and indignation of all. Unfortunately, Cuthbert didn't write down either of these prize-winning limericks in the budget. If you don't know what a limerick is, it's a poem which can be humorous, bawdy, or nonsensical. The first, second, and fifth lines should rhyme with each other, and so should the shorter third and fourth lines. Shakespeare wrote in the style of the limerick, and then later Edward Lear wrote nonsense rhythmic poems in the 1800s. He also wrote limericks, although they were not called limericks when Edward Lear was writing them. He wrote so many that he popularised the form and contributed to the start of the Victorian limerick craze. The term limerick first appeared at the end of the 1800s. There was a parlour game that linked the rhythmic poem to the city of Limerick in Ireland, but the connection between the two is not clear. Then all the magazine competitions started. Limericks became wildly popular, especially bawdy, rude ones. My 10 siblings, of course, never wrote any salacious ones. They were far too polite. They are a bit disdainful about the cheap penny newspapers, which were read by the poor working-class man. It sounds snobbish, but the Machel Cox family were a wealthy lot. They didn't read the penny papers. They described the working classes as the hoi polloi, and smutty limericks were possibly a bit beneath them. I'm going to read some of my favourite limericks now. None of these appear in the budget. I just like them. This is a classic one, written by Edward Lear in the mid-1800s. There was an old man with a beard who said, "It is just as I feared. 2 owls and a hen, 4 larks and a wren have all built their nests in my beard." There are also many variations of limericks that start, "There was a young man from Nantucket," and versions of this limerick have appeared in movies and TV shows. I never realised that a limerick about Nantucket was the first limerick that was ever published in America in 1902 by the Princeton Tiger, which is the magazine for Princeton University, which has been published since 1882. This was the original 1902 Nantucket limerick, which is quite clean. There once was a man from Nantucket who kept all his cash in a bucket, but his daughter, named Nan, ran away with a man, and as for the bucket, Nan took it. American readers liked it, and sequels to the original were soon published in other US newspapers, like this one. But he followed the pair to Pawtucket, the man and the girl with the bucket, and he said to the man he was welcome to Nan, but as for the bucket, Pawtucket. But the floodgates were opened, and US newspapers realised, too late, that there are many possible words that rhyme with Nantucket, leading to many salacious and explicit versions, hence the frequent movie references to limericks which begin, "There was a young man from Nantucket." Here are a couple more good ones that I like. I don't think anyone knows who wrote either of these two. There was a young lady named Cager, who, as the result of a wager, consented to fart the complete oboe part of Mozart's quartet in F major. And here's another one. There was a young lady from Ryde who ate many green apples and died. The apples fermented inside the lamented and made cider inside her insides. These next two limericks are both a bit rude, and they were collected and printed in a book containing 50 limericks in 1928 by Norman Douglas called Some Limericks. I'm just going to read 2 of these limericks. The rest from the book are really quite rude, and I thought it was maybe a bit much. In the introduction to his book, he makes no apology for the fact that most of his limericks are coarse and indecent. He says, if you don't appreciate their significance, then close the book and send it back, but he won't refund your money. He also says that those under 10 years of age shouldn't read his book. There was a young man of Belgravia who cared neither for God nor his Saviour. He walked down the Strand with his balls in his hand and was had up for indecent behaviour. Belgravia, of course, if you don't know London, is a posh suburb of London, compared to Pimlico, which definitely isn't a posh suburb. Well, it wasn't 100 years ago. Maybe it is now. Pimlico is mentioned in the next limerick. There was a young lady of Slough who said that she didn't know how. Then a young fellow caught her and jolly well taught her. She lodges in Pimlico now. And this last limerick was, I think, written by my great-grandfather Edmund, who was sibling number 2. He wrote this limerick, and it's on the same page as a photo of the house Edmund was living in, where Farmer Ellis and his family lived, and Edmund was the lodger. I was delighted when I found that the same house still exists today, in Woolly Moor in Derbyshire. It's no longer a farm, now it's luxury holiday accommodation. Oldfield House is on the corner of Temperance Hill and the B6014, just next to Ogston Reservoir. I'll put the modern photo and the old photo up on Twitter. If you're interested, go and have a look. My Twitter is called @CoxLetters. This is Edmund's limerick, written about his house, which he shortly has to leave as Farmer Ellis is moving. Edmund wants a parish of his own, but in December 1907, he hasn't yet got one. This view represents Woolly Moor, where a budgeteer lives, although poor. He must leave this abode. 'Tis a sad episode, though the parting may bring luck galore. The last item from the 1907 Christmas budget that I will read today is called A Budget Alphabet, written by Cuthbert. The family like writing poems that describe the family and each other. A Budget Alphabet. A stands for Arthur, our great educator. Also for Avis, our fine illustrator. B is for Bernard, oh, is not he silly? We all of us laugh, we must willy-nilly. C is for Cuthbert, who's writing this poem. D is the debt you all of you owe him. E is for Enid, who's writing so good. F is for Father in LLD Hood. G is for Garfield, a house full of boys. H is the horror that Arthur has for noise. I's an inside, who has played for Kent. J is the jam that into I went. K is for Kansas, whence Edmund came home. L are the letters that round the world roam. M is for Mother, who writes them each week, a pleasure to those who can't hear her speak. N is for Neville, who has just gone away. O is the office he works in each day. P is for Pretoria, the climate is bad. Q is the quinsy that Father once had. R is for ragging and other such hubbubs. S is for Sydenham, best of the suburbs. T is for Turkey, I'm sure I shall bust. U is for ugh, a note of disgust. V is for Vera, the great hockey player. W is wait, we really must weigh her. X is the exit, there goes the old year. Y is for Yuletide, with all its good cheer. There's no more to be Z. Cuthbert Machel Cox. My 2020 explanations on Cuthbert's alphabet poem. Quinsy is an illness. I'd never heard of it before. It's a complication of tonsillitis. I don't think we get quinsy nowadays, or if we do, it is probably easily curable by antibiotics, which of course didn't yet exist in 1907. LLD is the three-letter abbreviation for Father's Doctorate in Law. The double LL refers to Cambridge University, which originally gave doctorate qualifications for both canon law and civil law. I don't think that practice continues, but the 10 siblings refer to their father as LLD quite a bit. He also wrote anonymous letters to the Times newspaper, which he signed LLD. And Kansas refers to Kansas in the USA, where Edmund lived for a time before coming back to England, studying theology and becoming an Anglican priest. At the end of the 1880s, apparently, according to my Auntie Judy, Edmund ran a store, took part in a horse race to grab land, and was shot twice, as he showed her his bullet scars when he was an old man. In the next episode of 100 Years of Cox, I will read some more from the 1907 Christmas budget. We have loads more literary offerings which provided great amusement to the family over the Christmas holidays 113 years ago. Arthur writes a piece about Misdemeanor MacHell, which is a gently mocking story all about Avis. Bernard writes a clever poem about the 6 wives of Henry VIII, which his schoolmaster brothers say is so good that they will use it to teach Tudor history to their schoolboys. Enid writes a prize competition where the answer to each general knowledge question can be found among the letters of the word inhospitable. Despite this helpful clue, myself and 4 friends have today only managed to get 8 correct out of a total of 21 questions, and that was despite us cheating and using the internet as well when we got stuck. I do hope Enid gives the answers in 1908. I'll give you one question now to have a think about. What is the capital of one of the Balkan states? I presume that the Balkan states are still Albania, Croatia, Serbia, Romania, etc. I don't know how many letters the answer is, but the answer consists of some of the letters from the word inhospitable. Letters can only be used once, and you don't have to use them all. Answers on a postcard if you work them out, or send me an email, or put it up on Twitter. "100 Years of Cox. The Machel Cox budget letters and all content is subject to copyright and belongs to both myself and the Bodleian Library in Oxford. Machel Cox Letters is on Twitter, where I share all sorts of things. Cox Letters. If you have any questions, please write to me. Send me an email, machelcoxletters@gmail.com, especially if you can work out what is the capital of one of the Balkan states where the letters come from the word inhospitable, because I can't work it out. You have been listening to 100 Years of Cox. Thank you for listening.